Welcome back to Shat on TV Watchmen, the unofficial podcast companion piece to the hit HBO series Watchmen. I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me is my co-host, Roger Roper.
Is this a Zeus thing?
And this is our newsstand edition, where we look back on this week's episode of Watchmen and review the top listener emails and voicemail for the week. Raj, this week's episode was titled A God Walks Into a Bar. Most of the letters and voicemail we got followed under two major veins, either talking about Dr. Manhattan or Angela. Surprisingly, not a lot about Adrian Veidt, but there were a couple other topics that fell in there.
It's difficult to get everything in a show this dense and this layered. It's difficult to fit everything into an hour production, which is why we try and break it up into 3 different episodes. We do the Instacast, we do the deep dive, and we do the newsstand. If you have a topic you want to discuss and you can write, or your voicemail is somewhat interesting, then we'll discuss it. But I feel like, thankfully, it's been a return to form. We haven't had a lot of hate mail or a lot of hate iTunes reviews for our last deep dive in Instacast, so I feel like we're on the right path again.
If the amount of letters coming in are any indicator of the show's popularity, it is gaining steam because each week is more email, more voicemail than we got the week before. So we've got a ton to review here. We're going to try to get through all of them. Again, remember, if you don't hear your letter on the podcast, it will show up on the website, shatontv.com, under the newsstand. Also, some of these have been trimmed. Actually, most of these have been trimmed for length, just so we can fit in as many as possible. But you can see all of them in their entirety on shatontv.com as a service provided by the glorious Big D, who is not on the air with us for the podcast, but is still doing a ton of work in the background.
The amount of emails that we received this week asking where Big D was and why Big D isn't on the show, first of all, shows just how much he is loved and revered amongst the Shat family and then the Shat Nation, or whatever people are calling themselves. But also, I feel a little bit insecure about myself. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, hey, we have the King Bee, we have myself. You're doing an amazing job from a production standpoint. What more do these people want?
For those of you who have not heard Big D and don't know who this guy is, check out our sister podcast, Shat the Movies. It's an 80s and 90s movies podcast, but it's more about us than anything else. It's a little more relaxed than this show is. So if you think we're a little stuffy here, we let loose a lot over there, Raj especially. And you get to hear a lot more Raj and a lot less me. So it's much more pleasant on the air.
It's definitely a good inverse, this balance over here. I'm sure most people don't want to hear me talk, which is why they tune in to Watchmen and why we've grown in popularity every week.
All right, without further ado, let's get into the email. The first one comes from Brian in Greensboro, North Carolina. And this entire section of the podcast will be about Dr. Manhattan. Brian says, I'd love to know if you've seen many complaints from the internet about this casting move. He's talking about having a black Dr. Manhattan. I hope I'm overanalyzing it and that we're at a place in society where it doesn't bother anyone. But I love the social commentary of The Watchmen, and the same with your podcast. Although I did cringe a couple weeks back when King Bee said that the good guys were the ones with badges, because that is not always the case. And that comes from Brian in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Yeah, I posed this question on the deep dive and kind of our odds and ends section. I haven't gotten all the way to the end of the podcast. Did that stay? That stayed in the final edit?
Yeah, that made the cut.
That made the cut. Okay. So far, I really haven't seen anything. I haven't seen any internet outrage. I haven't seen any Twitter outrage. I stay away from Reddit or the subreddits because I don't want any kind of theories or someone else's ideas coming into the podcast on Reddit, because then you'll get called out on Twitter and Instagram and you'll get the internet rage. So I stay away from that. I really haven't. I mean, the great thing about Dr. Manhattan is it can be played by any actor, because Dr. Manhattan first has the ability to morph or change into any character or copy the likeness of any character, and he's blue. So I don't see any outrage so far in terms of who the actor is from a race perspective, nor from the actor having a terrible portrayal of Dr. Manhattan versus the Billy Crudup version in the 2009 Zack Snyder movie. Have you seen anything?
No, really nothing. And I think it speaks to the audience that is watching Watchmen. I think it's a little bit different than your average theater going Marvel audience. This is a bit more sophisticated, a bit more adult. And so I think people are really ready for that. Also, if you are uncomfortable with a TV show pushing the boundaries of Black characters, then Watchmen's probably not a show you're going to enjoy. So that's another factor I think that's keeping that sort of commentary out of the picture.
I wonder if people are going to be outraged, though, with the idea. I have seen more complaints around the possible gender swap, the possible Dr. Manhattan imbuing his powers into Angela. And I don't know if they're upset because it's such a overused trope or device. There is a letter I read. Hopefully we'll talk about it here, about a possible alternative of who he's giving his powers to. So I think that's going to anger more fans of the show than having a black actor portray Dr. Manhattan.
That's always healthy. Outrage about something that hasn't even happened yet. That's cool.
Yeah, right. Well, that's the internet.
Yeah. As far as the King Bee, look, the King Bee hates cops. So I don't think that what he was trying to say is that
in the show, they're the good guys.
I don't even think he's trying to say that. I think he's just trying to say that you still have an indicator of who the good guy's supposed to be. He's the guy with the badge. But Brian, trust me, if anybody knows that cops suck, it's King Bee. Next up, we have a letter from Cody, who wrote in recently. He says, I wasn't a fan of episode 8. I was actually surprised to hear that you guys and a lot of other people liked it so much. I didn't really buy any of the scenes with Angela. I don't think that's how this character would have acted in a situation where a guy claiming to be Dr. Manhattan is pretty much hitting on her when she's clearly wanting to be alone. I also really didn't like her reaction to the reveal that she might have started the whole thing. It just didn't seem genuine. But my biggest problem with the episode is how they handled Dr. Manhattan's powers. In this episode, Dr. Manhattan makes decisions and acts in the present moment based on things that he's aware of happening in the future. That doesn't really make sense. And you can't just say that's how Dr. Manhattan experiences time, because it's really not. He experiences the past, present, and future simultaneously, so he knows what's going to happen in the future, but he can't change it. In the comic, Dr. Manhattan always meets the future naturally. He doesn't do something in the present because of the future. When he meets Angela, it's not because of anything that's actually happening. It's only because of what will happen in the future. That's not how Dr. Manhattan works. I don't like that this whole story has happened because of Dr. Manhattan, and the only way for it to happen that way was to change Dr. Manhattan's powers. It kind of ruins the whole thing when I think about it that way. What do you guys think?
A lot of times when we were trying to explain Dr. Manhattan, I'll get on like a hamster wheel and my brain will just hurt because I'm trying to think and trying to piece it together logically. And when it comes to Dr. Manhattan, though, Gene, you talked a lot about this. We did a good deep dive, or on the deep dive, is that it's already predetermined. He's also a puppet, although he can see the strings.
There's concepts that greater minds than ours have contemplated and thought, yes, this is reasonable, including Einstein, including Aristotle. There is this idea of retrocausality. Why is it that cause has to precede effect? That's what we're taught. That's the logic, and that's what our brains accept. But there are many well-respected minds that contest that. I think the show is attempting to challenge that as well. Now, with Dr. Manhattan, I will agree with you, Cody, that some of his behavior is a little quirky for my taste. Like, we got the explanation in the deep dive about the waffle making, and it may or may not be accurate, but the whole point being that it's like, it feels very Hitchhiker's Guide, where it's like, why is it making waffles? It's such a crazy thing to do right now. Oh, it'll be explained later.
First of all, I don't have a problem with the way that Angela is portrayed, right? She's in a down moment, and I think she's kind of toying with this guy who comes and approaches her. It takes a while for her to believe her, and then even after that, it still takes her some time to believe whether or not this guy is genuine or who he says he is. But when he says to her, the only problem I guess I have, the more I look at the episode, is when he is explaining to her, I tried to be a savior. I tried to be all these things that was expected of me. If your future is predetermined, right, or all your experiences are already predetermined by someone else pulling the strings, then you can never really try to be something other than what's already been laid out for you. again, if we're trying to break down the logic, like I think Cody is here, was he always intended to be a device and used for war by individuals like Nixon and the American government?
Thanks, Cody, for your letter. Next up, we have one from Josh King, and he's writing about Manhattan transferring his powers. He says, introducing this new non-canon idea that Dr. Manhattan can bestow his powers to someone else feels a bit cheap, underdeveloped, and solely for the purpose of setting up the finale. Also, why have I seen 3 entire episodes without the coolest damn character in the show? Even with a great save the day entrance, I've really missed Looking Glass, and it's been a little disappointing that he's had 0 screen time after the cliffhanger ending to his backstory episode, my personal favorite of the season so far. Another hole to me, if Cal saved Angela in The White Knight, why didn't he wonder to himself in that moment, whoa, I just zapped a guy out of existence with my mind? And where I'm torn, these racist morons have done what not even Adrian could do. They got the best of Dr. Manhattan. Right. A large part of me thinks it's absurd that he would sit and knowingly let a guy behind him capture and teleport him over to the Cyclops base. He could vaporize that dude in a microsecond. Why is he making waffles? Just teleport the racist lynch mob outside to Pluto and we'll finish our waffles and have this conversation. And on the other hand, there are many moments in both the comic and this episode where Dr. Manhattan himself acknowledges that while he can see his future, he cannot or will not change it. He can see the strings, but is a puppet himself. This is what happens. That is when it happens. Now it has happened. And perhaps the immense frustration I experienced as this episode ended was the very same that pissed off Janie, Lori, and Angela something fierce. As he says, quote, the way I experience time is unique, and for you, particularly infuriating. All in all, writing Manhattan has got to be a tricky thing, and they did a pretty bang-up job. I can't wait to hear the deep dive. Josh King in Austin, Texas.
I just want to point out that there are a lot of racist bastards in the world, and not all of them are morons. A lot of them are being used by powers or much smarter, more intelligent, and nefarious organizations above them. And I think that's the case with Seventh Kavalry, and that why they introduced the idea of the concept of the Cyclops. And the Cyclops seems to be pretty well funded. And if Lady True is not behind it, then certainly they're using her technology. So they've co-opted it or stolen it or purchased it. I don't know what they've done, but they certainly didn't create it. So from an explanation perspective, that's what I've received from it. Now, in terms of whether or not why he didn't go out there and why he's creating waffles, I think it's, again, if you want to use a different analogy, then, look back to Infinity War, where Doctor Strange uses the time stone to go forward in future and see, listen, there's only one thing that we can do to change our future or change the outcome. All these other times are going to lead to the same result. So I'm going to sit here. I'm going to accept it. I'm going to make some waffles. And I'm going to play this out.
Bingo. Perfectly said, Raj. Next up, we have one from Kate. She's writing in about Dr. Manhattan and autism. She said, this morning, while I was listening to Jean talk about Dr. Manhattan, I flashed to my 15-year-old son, who is currently being evaluated for autism. He lent me his copy of Watchmen.
Yes!
I've struggled to understand him and what makes him tick, but as I listened to you discuss Dr. Manhattan, I got a deeper understanding and empathy for this amazing young man. I'm going to listen several more times because what you said really resonated with me and put things in perspective that have been difficult for me to nail down. No, I'm not saying my son is a blue god. I guess I'm suggesting that maybe Dr. Manhattan is on the autism spectrum. As I'm learning more and more about autism, I see a lot of the characteristics in the blue guy. I went down a Google wormhole and found several references to Damon Lindelof and autism. I wonder if he also saw similar characteristics and that inspired his interpretation of Dr. Manhattan. Thank you for your thoughtful pod. You give me hope that others will understand and appreciate my son as he navigates this world. Yours in nerddom, Kate.
I have to admittedly say that I am not an expert on autism. I understand that there's a scale, or at least a spectrum, if you will, of individuals that are extremely intelligent or see the world in a different way than quote unquote normal, plebes like myself. So I don't really fully understand it, but there have been, I guess, as we learn more and more about autism and the effects that it has on the brain and the way that we relate to our surroundings and the type of information that processes in our brain, I think there have been people in the past in our history, very intelligent individuals like Einstein, individuals like Alan Turing, composers like Beethoven and Mozart. There have been suggestions that those individuals may have been on the spectrum or autism. So again, admittedly, I don't know enough about the disease. I don't have anyone that I'm close to in my family that has had that or has experienced that. So I don't know. But what I've seen portrayed or the few documentaries and podcasts I've listened to, this could be. It could very well be that there is a little bit of that I don't want to say it's cold and calculating, but the way that he views the world and sees the world is different than everyday normal individuals. And I think that's why he's trying to explain it to someone who can't see it, because that's not how they experience it. And I think that's why it's been so hard for us as a society and as humans to understand individuals with autism. And I think there's more right that's going on in the world in terms of trying to understand this disease than try to blame it on things like vaccines and shit like that. Because ultimately, I think there's a lot to learn from individuals that see the world in a different way, in a different manner.
Thanks for writing in, Kate. And your words did mean a lot. It's always heartwarming to hear that we're making a difference in anyone's life. So if you got a 15-year-old son who gets Watchmen, like the comics, good for him, because my nephew's 15 and this shit's way over his head. He's still stuck on Spider-Man.
I'm wearing a Spider-Man shirt here. Go Taj.
Next, we got a question from a listener about how the Seventh Kavalry knew about Dr. Manhattan. And listener Kalechi writes in, so the show is amazing, but how did the Seventh Kavalry know Cal is Dr. Manhattan? The story link is great, but confusing since he zapped the guy that was trying to kill Angela previously. I'm talking about the White Knight. Did someone see him? And why wait this long to kill him? Plus, I know he wouldn't die. He can pass his powers. I need answers. And we had a couple listeners write in with some suggestions. The first one is Andrea. And she says, when Angela gives the speech at the chief's funeral, she mentions that they both talked about what they would say at each other's funerals after the White Knight, which made me think that she may have told him about Cal being Dr. Manhattan too. Besides Adrian stuck on Europa, no one else knew about him. It seems like Judd and Angela had a friends turned into family type of relationship, so it makes sense that he would be the only person she trusted with the secret. And after the scare of the White Knight, she may have realized that someone else needed to know in case she died. What do you think of that, Raj?
I just love Don Johnson and the character of Judd Crawford so much. I'm going to disagree just from a bias perspective. I'll start out there. But I think what makes more sense to me is that Lady True already knew that Cal was Dr. Manhattan. And if I were to think that she has some sort of revenge in mind to take down individuals that may have killed her family and killed her mom and killed her country, then it would make sense to me that she's the one that informed the Seventh Kavalry that Cal was Dr. Manhattan versus someone like a Judd. I think there's an easier path there, and maybe Lindelof is just trying to steer people like myself towards that when it might be something else like they mention here.
And a listener, Jesse, seems to agree with you, Raj. Jesse wrote in, I don't think Lady True knew all along that Dr. Manhattan was Cal. I assume she learned it when she did a deep dive into Angela's mind. She was extracting her memories. Did I miss some dialogue where Lady True said she always knew? I think Lady True was searching for Dr. Manhattan to retrieve Ozymandias, and she's using the 7th Cavalry to capture him. That's why you see her equipment at the 7th Cavalry hideout. The trade-off is that they can keep Dr. Manhattan after he retrieves Ozymandias. She probably doesn't care that they have him because she's got some hidden devilish plot on the side, like Ozzy did with the giant squid. A secret plot that has been happening before our eyes without us realizing, and one that makes the Cyclops movement meaningless. Sadly, I have no theories as to what. I just thought it'd be cool to see something similar to the giant squid plot to end this season. And that comes from Jesse.
Yeah, I think there is going to be something with the giant squid at the end of the season. I think that's the whole reason for the clock tower. There's going to be something there. There's suggestions that the United States government may have taken over the squid teleportation, or it could be Lady True who took over the Veidt Enterprises and may have discovered this technology. I also think that Lady True knew there was something going on in Europa because she sent up to 50, according to Pedia, she sent over 50 Voyager class satellites. She launched those in 2010. And I think you see that in one of the episodes. I think you see one of those satellites fly over Europa. So I think she knows that Ozzy is there. I think that's the whole reason for the dead bodies on the outside of this world. I think she knows that this terrarium exists. So again, my money's on Lady True versus Keen and the nefarious Cyclops.
So, Raj, you brought up the squid rains, and listener Mike wrote in. He said, "Hey guys, I'm a longtime viewer of your podcast for Game of Thrones, The Leftovers, Westworld, and now Watchmen, and I love your take on these great TV shows. I don't often agree with you, but you always make me think and often point out things that I otherwise would have missed. I think Watchmen is breaking new ground in quality television, and episode 8 was the best. I have one question. If Adrian Veidt has been on Europa for the last 10 years, who continues to reign the squid on Earth? It appears that it's a manual process, and he had no time to train and transfer this task to anyone. Just wondering if you have any thoughts or theories." And listener Gary Schatz also wrote in with the same question. So it seems to be a popular question, and one that I don't have an answer for. I was thinking maybe Lady Trio, since she seems to be taking over the operations, but the government also makes sense.
Yeah, I think both of those are probably the top two on on my list, and the likely usual suspects that would be controlling the squid. And Pedia does say that she purchased all rights to his organization. So if I get the keys to someone's underground bunker, of course I'm going to come across this squid teleportation device, and I'm going to say, "Oh, that's what he's been using it for. So I'm going to keep doing this." So yeah, Lady True or the U.S. government, based on if that video is real, if that video is authentic, that was shown to Looking Glass, then it would make sense that he would hand over Robert Redford control of a similar device that would still be raining squid, or give the ability.
Thanks for your squid question, Mike. Next up, we have one all the way from South Sudan. That's wild. Yeah, I didn't know we had listeners in South Sudan. This one comes from James. He says, "Hey, I'm James from Africa, South Sudan. I listened to Shat on TV podcast on Watchmen series. My questions are, 1, how is Angela behind Judd Crawford's death? And 2, how does something said in the future affect the past and again come to affect the future? I hope that's clear to you. I wish to listen to my email in the podcast. Thank you." And that comes from James.
This is definitely the email of the week. The fact that someone from the South Sudan, the continent of Africa, is listening to our little podcast here and is writing in an email. And I just love that when I see technology used for good instead of evil. And this really helps me out. In terms of the answers, Angela is behind Judd Crawford's death because she introduced the idea of Judd Crawford to Dr. Manhattan while he was simultaneously having a conversation with Will Reeves. So it's almost like an Inception like event that occurs. Now, in terms of how does the past or how does the future affect the past? Again, I can only say it's because he simultaneously experiences things at the same. I don't know what that word is, though. I'm not that smart.
If I can nerd out for a bit, there's 2 terms that we should get familiar with in this. One is retrocausality, and again, I mentioned it earlier in the podcast. It's just the concept that the cause comes after the effect, which sounds ludicrous to us, but it's a philosophical possibility. Another term is a bootstrap paradox. And this is a paradox of time travel that's a little more familiar with people. It's when an object or a piece of information gets sent back in time, and that creates an infinite cause-effect loop. If something was thrown into a loop in time, going backward and forward, you would never know when it started because it's like chicken and the egg. I mean, this is something that's been brought up on the show itself. So, but let's talk about that retrocausality. So philosophers started asking very early on, does the cause always have to precede the effect? And one example of a hypothetical is something called a tachyonic antitelephone. So to understand that, you got to understand tachyons. And a tachyon is basically a theoretical particle that can travel faster than light. So right now in our known universe, we believe nothing can travel faster than light. But if something could, then it wouldn't be bound by time. And if a tachyon were possible, then people like Albert Einstein and another physicist, Arnold Sommerfeld, basically believe that the tachyonic antitelephone would be a possibility. It's a theoretical item that could be used to send signals into the past. What's interesting about that is we all know Dr. Manhattan is the big blue guy, right? Well, what's funny is there's a type of radiation that's basically centered around the fact that if a tachyon were to pass through a medium that had a light wavelength that was slower than the tachyon itself, or I'm sorry, not just the tachyon, a particle itself, then that would cause a blue glow. It's something that you would see like in a nuclear reactor, that sort of thing. So it all kind of comes together there. You know, the devices that Veidt builds have those blue glow, and Veidt was able to build these tachyon fields to block Manhattan's view of things. It's actually a very smart way to explain that if tachyons were possible, then the tachyonic antitelephone is possible, and then messages actually could be sent backward in time, causing retrocausality and bootstrap paradox. So really smart shit.
Wow. My brain hurts.
That's my best explanation of it. And I'm sure there are physicists out there who are going to write in and be like, you fucked this part up. But speaking of science, Travis Gayton wrote in something that's kind of not that relevant anymore, Raj. It's about the trebuchet. But we asked the question of like, what would the escape velocity need to be to get off of Europa? And so Travis wrote in, he said, hey, you were talking about if you could use the trebuchet to get off the moon. It depends on the moon. But Jupiter's smallest moon has an escape velocity of 12 1,000ths of a kilometer per second, or 12 miles per hour. Trebuchets launch around 23 meters per second, or 51 miles per hour. So
you could escape the moon, but you're not going to make it all the way back to Earth.
I mean, you'd have to be, if you want a real good shot, and two, like, what are you in? Your body's not going to make it for sure.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Again, I don't know how they're going to explain him getting off the moon without being teleported back. But again, it's a comic book show. So as long as it has a reasonable explanation, I'll be okay with it.
Another quick episode 7 throwback comes from Josh and Austin. And it's talking about the trapdoor scene where Jane Crawford gets Laurie Blake on the chair and then down into the hole. Josh writes in, howdy guys. I don't know if you saw this. It makes me like this scene a lot more now. And it's a link to the fact that scene is a confirmed homage to an SNL skit with John Lovitz, where he's got like a faulty trapdoor manufacturer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I watched this. It's pretty good. It's a good skit. A lot of the throwback SNL skits, like the old, like the Lovitz and the Phil Hartman, a lot of the stuff doesn't hold up. It's very dated. But this one is pretty good. Also, The Simpsons did this one, right? Where Mr. Burns is trying to send Homer into a trapdoor and he keeps screwing it up. So not only did SNL do it, but also The Simpsons did it.
It kind of makes me like the scene less, Josh. I'm going to be honest.
Yeah.
It's like, it just seems indulgent.
It's real indulgence. But it's a funny skit. It's a good skit if you like trapdoors and John Lovitz.
All right. Next up, we have one from Stephen Johnson, who writes in, hey guys, love the show. I've been listening to all the episodes so far. I don't think you guys talked about how it's revealed that Will Reeves can walk while he's with Lady Trieu, but in Angela Abar's flashback of Will's memories, we see him stay in his wheelchair when he uses the flashlight to mesmerize Judd Crawford to hang himself. Can this have any significance? Thanks, Stephen Johnson.
Now, this is a tasty question. If we know he can walk and we know he can, is he just doing this to trick individuals into thinking that he's some sort of helpless individual, and so they'll get close so he can do his white flashy mesmerism trick on them. They're like, "Oh, you're a old man. You're helpless. I'm gonna come up to you and see what's going on." And then he hypnotizes them and makes them wheel them out to whatever plan he's got for them.
Yeah, I'm not sure, Raj. I admittedly didn't even think about this until Stefan, or maybe it's Stefan. I apologize if I mispronounced your name, but I didn't even think about this until it was pointed out. And once I did, I was like, it could be something. But I also know that family members of mine who are older and use wheelchairs don't need the wheelchair. They're not confined to the wheelchair. It's just much more comfortable. They can't walk for long periods of time or prefer not to. So there is that possibility that Will is, I mean, he's 105 years old. Like, he might be able to stand up and move around, but he's not dancing,
But it did seem particularly odd that when it's revealed that he can get up, that he does it like with, I've been doing this all along as a trick. I've been doing this as a way to convince others that I'm this helpless old man, when in all actuality, I'm this, former hero, vigilante, the hooded justice, the OG, and I'm not as helpless as people think I am. I'm just trying to trick them. So I don't know if there's any significance per se that's going to have an outcome on the finale, but it's something that I didn't think about until Stefan mentioned this, or Stefan. So great email.
All right, Raj, I want you to brace yourself, because this next one is a doozy for a Judd Crawford fan like you. This one comes in from Raymond in Atlanta. And Raymond says, Judd says that the KKK uniform is part of his heritage, an expression I've heard used for the Confederate flag debate. But heritage is not a good thing or bad thing. It's just a different word for history. And sometimes history is bad. I have a heritage of murderers, gangbangers, rapists, homophobes, and monsters in my family tree. It doesn't mean that I should create shrines to them. You guys have speculated about whether or not Judd Crawford's wife was the real bad guy and Judd was just a patsy. But how would Judd not know that there was a KKK shrine in his personal closet? If she was the mastermind, wouldn't it be in her closet? Is it possible that Judd didn't know there was a trap door underneath his couch? In addition to that, Senator Keene implicates Judd directly, not his wife. Also, the KKK uniform wasn't just in a cardboard box collecting dust in the attic. It was on display almost like a religious shrine in his personal space. My question is, would we still be having this conversation if that was a Nazi uniform, not a KKK uniform, in Judd's closet? The German people have come to grips with their own national shame and have put it in the proper context. We as Americans have often had a harder time doing this. And if you don't think that the KKK was as bad as the Nazis, then you don't really have a full understanding of history. At the end of the day, I think it's important for you guys to realize this reality. Judd was, in fact, a bad guy. Not because it's just a more accurate character description, but because we need to take the hard looks at our history in whatever form it comes. You're already doing this so well in this podcast, but it'd be good if you looked past your love for the Don and realize what his character truly was, a very bad guy. Thanks for letting me rant. Still a super fan of the show. Can't wait for your take on the final episode. Raymond from Atlanta.
Yeah, Raymond, I'm the first to admit that I am a Don Johnson homer, and I do not want him to be a bad guy. Are there indications, like you so eloquently pointed out, that he is a bad guy? Absolutely. Would it make sense if he's a bad guy? Fine. I totally get it. I personally just don't want him to be. And then there are clues that he may not be a bad guy, because again, his interactions with Angela and with her family don't seem to indicate that of someone that would be a racist individual. And it's not just the interactions he's having. He seems to know that what he's doing, I think he knew he was about to die. I think he knew he was going to get into something bad when he says things like, it's my own funeral. And I think he's being controlled and he doesn't know how to get out of it. And I think he's trying to protect those around him that he cares about. And I do truly believe that he cared about Cal. And I do believe that he cared about Angela. I do believe that there's forces greater than him that are unfortunately his legacy that he doesn't have a way out of. And that may be the cause for the Comanche horse painting up in his wall, and the fact that he's got that KKK robe in there, in that he's trying to right the wrongs of his past, of his legacy, of his heritage. But there's forces greater than him that he is a puppet, like we all are in this world. And he's being used, but he's trying to fight, and he loses his life when he tries to go against the grain. But he could also just be a villain.
Yeah, Raymond, part of doing the podcast is not being able to speak for the whole podcast. And there are times that Raj and the King Bee and I completely disagree or see the show differently. Part of this gig is sharing the microphone and not shitting on each other's ideas and being open to a different idea. So I came on the pod. I introduced this concept. I said, I think Judd is a benevolent racist, and he exhibits the behaviors of a benevolent racist, meaning, yes, he is racist, but he's trying to do the right thing. He's just doing it as a racist, so it's inherently wrong. I guess his heart is in the right place, but his mind is stupid, right? I'm also the one who said that because Judd went to dinner and went to, Black Oklahoma, the musical, it doesn't make him okay. I still think that having a hood in your closet is a problem. And when he said to Will Reeves, I'm trying to fucking help you people, I bristled at that. I was like, Jesus, did he really fucking say that? Like, fuck this guy. The show is not, it's beyond good and evil. It's beyond a binary view of people. And I think the point that they're trying to make here, that Lindelof is trying to make here, is that Judd is a racist, and he's on the wrong side of things, but he's not, he's not like the guys in Cyclops that you saw in New York. He's a different type of racist. He's a racist for today, I guess.
Yeah, and I will be the first one to admit that the KKK is evil. And if you want to go down a rabbit hole and see, and if you think the KKK was eradicated, look into the Kappa Alpha Order and do some research on that and how they continued their nefarious plan, but did it in a more acceptable mainstream manner. So look up the Kappa Alpha Order if you really want to get really angry at American society, especially in Atlanta, Georgia.
And one other thing, Raymond, I'm not trying to equate my experience in any way with the Black experience in America. I've never experienced anything like that. And it is a horrifying and disgusting history of persecution. But I am an ethnic Kurd, and I can relate in a way the Judd Crawford thing to Saddam Hussein. So as a Kurd, we do not have our own country. And during the 80s and even into the 90s, Saddam Hussein carried out genocide against my people, chemical bombings, and killed thousands, forced them to flee. They've been refugees, and they were also killed during the Iranian Revolution. My people had a couple of shitty decades, and but one of the things is when someone argues that Saddam Hussein should not have been unseated in Iraq, I'll hear out that argument, because although he hated the Kurds and although he killed thousands of them in a brutal and disgusting way, like chemical bombing of children and nerve gas, the fact is that I can see that with that guy out of office, shit got really bad for everybody in Iraq. And so the idea being that, is he a bad guy? Yes. Were there positive, quote unquote, positive aspects to him being around? Yeah. And so if you look at Judd, there is a possibility that him being hanged ends up being a bad thing for everybody in Tulsa. It doesn't make him a good guy, but we would still argue that it might have not been the right move.
Yep.
Thanks for writing in, Raymond, and thanks everyone who wrote in. And finally, we have a bit of a feel-good email from Kalman from Minnesota, who writes in, hey guys, great mailbox episode this week. I rewatched episode 2 last night and wanted to share something I noticed. There's a scene where Cal is dressed as a ghost playing with the kids. Angela enters the scene and one of the kids says, I'm an owl, he's a pirate, we caught a ghost on our ship and we're going to make him walk the plank. And Angela replies, be sure to put rocks in his pocket so he sinks to the bottom. I fucking love this show. Each new episode reveals things you probably didn't or couldn't pick up on the first viewing of a previous episode. It's almost like with every new episode, you can again rewatch old episodes and learn or notice something new each time. I know shows have done this before, but not to this extent. I think I've watched the first 2 episodes 7 or 8 times, and each time it seems to get better. Like when Angela's in her bakery after finding Judd hanging, she breaks down and cries in the weapons cage. After watching what she has gone through since she was a child, you really feel sympathetic in a way you just couldn't upon the first viewing. Thanks again for all the pods, Cal from Minnesota.
You know, one thing I didn't even reference is that Cal is playing Dr. Manhattan, or is Cal the embodiment of this Calvin individual, but they call him Cal. And then Kal-El is also the alien name for Superman. Speaking of the Angela's children, there's a scene in, I think it's episode 2. Topher's up in his room and he's playing with a puzzle. It looks like an advanced Lego set. And I just assumed that, it's run on magnets and it's hovering. And that's just the toys that they have in this world. But what if, and this was introduced, so I don't know who the writer is. I don't have the email in front of them. Gino wrote in and he said, what if the eggs have always been Cal feeding his powers to the children? And Topher is one that's imbued with some of the Dr. Manhattan powers. Like he's redistributing the wealth, if you will, amongst his family.
And doesn't even know it?
And maybe doesn't know it, yeah.
Yeah, man, I could see it.
Yeah.
A lot of people have asked, like, what are we going to do this winter? Like, we're going to have Christmas break and no Watchmen to watch. Bullshit. You got 9 episodes to watch when this is all over. Watch them again. Take a lesson from Calman.
That's right.
All right. And that brings us finally to our one voicemail for the week. And it comes from Steven about Adrian Veidt.
Hey, guys. Stephen Wickham here. I've wrote many times over the past year, first time calling. I had a thought after seeing Adrian Veidt's flashback in this week's episode of Watchmen. The statue we see is a much older version of him, but the younger Adrian Veidt that anyone last saw in 2009 looked very different. So I was wondering if that statue in Lady True's clock tower was somehow related to the older Adrian Veidt. Not sure. Don't really have a theory. Just had a thought after seeing the episode. Also, I know it's coming up on the movie podcast. Recently watched Dumb and Dumber. Definitely a Zero White movie. Have a good day.
Yeah, I agree with you. Dumb and Dumber is a perfect comedy, and I'm looking forward to watching that and doing a review at shatthemovies.com. In terms of the statue, we've also received some emails and some Twitter that could that be Adrian Veidt somehow trapped or encased like a Han Solo in carbonite? And eventually he's going to be, I guess, unleashed by Veidt. It'd be weird to introduce that type of technology this deep into the season. So I don't think that that's a frozen Dr. Veidt encased in gold or Adrian Veidt encased in gold. There has to be some sort of meaning for the statue, right? Because it's like a Chekhov statue. They introduce it. You can't not introduce that and then not reference it back again. But again, I don't think he's trapped in that. That's the only thing I have to say about that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know if it's us as viewers going crazy, because there could be that sort of the power of suggestion, right? So if we want to think that the statue has something to do with Adrian Veidt, that we start to imagine, well, does it look like he's kind of younger? Maybe he looks older. I don't really know. And so part of me thinks it's all in our heads, but we have had now this idea of retrocausality introduced into the show. So it could be that this statue of Adrian is a view of him from the future that's placed in the past. Or maybe if Lady Trio is obsessed with the idea of bringing him back, she has a statue of what he would look like when he comes back. Basically saying that that's the Adrian that I want to think about, not the Adrian of the past. I don't know, Steven, but I think we're going to find out in the last episode. Either that statue is going to come into play or it's going to be an absolute nothing. So we'll have to see.
Like Lube Man. Some people have suggested Lube Man is Adrian Veidt. Like he's come back somehow before. I kid you not. People have said that's Adrian Veidt as Lube Man because he's returned at the time when she buys the Ma and Pa Clark farm. And so he's been, masquerading as this new character, Lube Man. And that's going to be the big reveal.
First of all, he runs very fast for an octogenarian. And secondly, I guess if you were spending 3 years hurtling through space, with your own poop, you might get a little weird too.
Oh, geez. I love this show so much. Thanks, everyone who wrote in.
Yeah, thank you all. That concludes this week's episode of Shat on TV Watchmen Newsstand. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat on TV. On Facebook, just search for Shat on TV Podcast. The website is shatontv.com. You can email us with your ideas for the next newsstand at hosts@shatontv.com. And also hit us up with your ideas for the episode 9 deep dive. We'd love to hear them. If you'd like to send us a voicemail, the number is 914-719-SHAT. And Roger Roper, if you haven't heard already, has been hard at work creating the Shat on TV and Shat the Movie shop. You can get to that now at shatontv.com/merch or shatthemovies.com/merch. Roger, what kind of things can people find in the store?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. There's a lot of fun stuff up there. We've got designs for all your favorite hosts, including a Gene Loves Dog that was created by one of our listeners, Matthew Ilda. Want to give him a shout out. You can follow him at Ilda Matthew with 1T on Twitter. It's you holding, it's you displaying your two loves, which is the keto diet, showing that you've lost now what, 20 pounds, 25 pounds?
Yeah, about 25 pounds.
About 25 pounds. And you're holding up one of your colleagues' dogs. And it's a depiction of that. You can get that on a coffee mug. You can get that on a Tri-Blend t-shirt. One of the things that we wanted to do with our merch stores, we wanted to have like fun merch, inside references that people who only listen to the podcast can get. So you have that. You have Roger's Awesome World. That's the best seller. That's pretty cool. Thanks, Mom, for buying 4 shirts of that. You also have a young Big D. And with his phrase, good evening. You have a King Bee Adventure World, tote bags and t-shirts. And I really like his logo. I actually bought one of his stuff and I'm going to give it away as Christmas presents. But you can find all, like you said, all the fun stuff there. Right now, through the end of the year, you can use the promo code SHAT20, that's SHAT20, to get 20% off every order. And everything is designed and printed on demand. We don't handle any of the shipping. That's all done by Teespring. So again, we're not making much money off of it, but people have asked, hey, when are you going to get merch? When are you going to get merch over the last 3 years? And we finally have some really cool designs and stuff that we're proud of. So go check it out. Buy it for friends. If you have don't know what to get your boss for Christmas, or you have that white elephant, New Year's Eve party that you're going to, then, get them some good Shat merchandise. They'll be like, what is this? And then we can get more listeners. So yeah, check it out.
Thanks, Raj. Wherever fine podcasts can be found, including iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pandora, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. And if you stop by iTunes, please leave a review that helps the podcast grow. On behalf of my co-host, Roger Roper, and the King Bee, I'm Gene Lyons. Be sure to join us Sunday night for our Instacast after episode 9, the finale of Watchmen. See how they fly.